the Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z here, author of the Cannabis Business Book, and you're listening to the Cannabis Business Coach podcast, where I chat with and coach the highest performing entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is the Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z here, and on this week's episode, I am joined by the iconic, the living legend, the man himself, Danko. And for those of you who don't know Danko, he is a legend in the world of cannabis cultivation. He had been the Senior Cultivation Editor at High Times for, I don't know, like probably a decade or something in that ballpark. What was it, like 20 years almost at High Times? And a whole number of other cannabis grow and education and writing ventures, and probably responsible for helping, I don't know, if I had to guess, millions of people learn more about how to grow cannabis and sharing that, what I call plant-based education. And that's why I call him the iconic, legendary Danko. So Danny, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And if there's anything I didn't include in the intro, feel free to tell the folks at home a little more about yourself.
Right. Well, as you mentioned, I've been almost 2 decades at High Times, 18 years full-time over there as a cultivation reporter, and then editor, and then senior editor. And yeah, I got to travel a lot all around the world and visit different people's cultivation operations and smoke their cannabis and hash. And so it's been pretty amazing. A lot of wonderful traveling experiences. And along the way, wrote a couple of books. One was the official High Times Field Guide to Marijuana Strains in 2011. And just recently in 2018, I wrote the book Cannabis, A Beginner's Guide to Growing Marijuana. And so, that's kind of been my lane, has been sort of teaching people how to grow their own, visiting people's gardens, doing profiles, tasting different strains of cannabis and hash around the world, and reporting on the flavors and the effects and the scents and, all of that. And it's just been exciting. There were mentors of mine, Ed Rosenthal and Jorge Cervantes and Kyle Cushman and Mel Frank, people that came before me in this industry and as authors and people who travel around teaching people how to grow. And that's who I learned from. And I just wanted to pass it down to the next generation and people who are interested in cultivation, because I think it's the way that you get the highest quality.
Amazing. I'm like, as a joke, I'm wondering, if you were like, what are the Danko genetics? Is it like an Ed Rosenthal crossed with the Kyle Cushman, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, as with genetics, you always have to, praise the people that came before you, your elders, and the people who you learn from, and that's who made you who you are. And so people like that, as well as politically, people like Jack Herer and Dr. Lester Grinspoon, and people like that who taught me that not only is this a wonderful plant and a healing flower, but we have to fight for it. We have to make sure that people aren't in jail for it, aren't losing their families or their rights because they happen to consume this healing flower. You know what I mean? It's lumped in with dangerous narcotics, but we all know that we're talking about something more benign than alcohol or nicotine or even sugar. So we're really talking about an herb of the pharmacopoeia that we use in varying degrees for various reasons. And so, I should also mention I was the host of a podcast called Free Weed from Danko from 2011 to 2018. And I've recently launched a new podcast called Grow Bud Yourself, which is basically, the mission of both of those shows was to teach people to grow their own if they so wish. And if they don't, at least to educate them as to how great cannabis is grown so that they can judge the cannabis that they consume, by that criteria. And I think I'm also the person who's probably judged the most Cannabis Cups ever in the history of Cannabis Cups, in Amsterdam and America combined. And so, I have that interesting perspective, I guess, on what the flavors and effects and all of these things have, and what effect they have upon our palate and upon our mindsets and upon, basically, the medicinal aspects of it as well.
Amazing. And I can personally recommend and attest to the quality of Danny's books. And if you're looking to grow your own, definitely pick up the latest book. And I'll include a link in the show notes, so it's really easy. And I'm looking forward to checking out the new podcast. But Danny, I got to ask you, what is it like to be in that rarefied air and in that unique position of having had access to more cannabis product and probably more top shelf cannabis products than 99% of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's an honor. It really is. It's something like I sort of dedicated my life to at a young age, and over time, I was a High Times reader before I worked for High Times, and I had even worked in the hemp industry for a company called Headcase in the late 90s. We made hemp baseball hats and t-shirts and stuff. So it's something I dedicated my life to. And so to have the opportunity to go to Amsterdam and, meet the people who bred the seeds that I was growing back home in the US, I call it marijuana fantasy camp. Because if you're into baseball, you go to baseball fantasy camp, and if you're into cannabis, you go to the Cannabis Cup. It was really your opportunity to meet your heroes and shoot the shit with them, and really talk shop and learn, because really, it's all about learning and absorbing the information and not assuming that you know everything either. I mean, like it's quite humbling to go over there or to go to one of these events and listen to the panels and talk to the experts and find out that, hey, we're just simply scratching the surface of this plant and what its capabilities are and what we can learn from it, and glean for ourselves as a species, and for each individual for their own purposes.
So can you tell me a story about one of those old school, like original, one of the first Amsterdam cups? I'm curious what it was like to be a part of one of those first cups.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I remember my first cup, actually just got chills. I remember my first cup was in the 90s, and I was actually still with Headcase. I wasn't with High Times. We were a vendor, and we had a booth. We were selling baseball hats, and we made hemp fabric baseball hats for a lot of the coffee shops and the seed companies. So we made Sensi seeds and TH seeds, and we made their hats that they sold in their coffee shops or that they sold at their booths. And so we had a booth there selling hats, $4.20 on the hat and things like that. And our booth was directly next to Jack Herer's booth, where he was selling his book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which was so seminal and influential on the activism movement and the hemp movement in particular, but all of cannabis legalization movement. I mean, he basically said hemp would save the earth. He said many things that we sort of take for granted now, but at the time sounded absolutely insane. I mean, he said not hemp will save the earth. He said that if you replace alcohol and tobacco and prescription drugs in your life with cannabis, you will live an extra decade minimum. Things like that. Things that sort of don't sound quite as outrageous now, but in the late 90s, in the height of the just say no kind of era, this was heresy, to declare these things. And he declared them in his, very, sort of Jack Herer kind of way as well. He was very, interesting in his demeanor, and here I am, a kid in my 20s, just selling baseball hats, and he's there. The whole time, this is like 5 days we're there. He's just trying, we're smoking, we're hanging out. He's just trying to feed me mushrooms the whole time. He's purchased probably a pound of mushrooms, and he's just feeding everyone mushrooms. Mushrooms were the key to the universe, and all these things. And I'm trying to resist because I'm working a booth. I gotta take in money and make change. And this is in the Guilders, pre-Euro days, and it's all very confusing. I'm over there, and but ultimately, on the last day, he did prevail, and I did eat some mushrooms, and listen to him, sort of rap about, mushrooms and cannabis as these, sacred things that, beyond anything that I had a comprehension of at the time. And of course, tripping on mushrooms and listening to Jack Herer say these things was a pretty profound experience for me at that age and at that time. So that's something that I cherish and will take, and of course, the whole time we smoked, I don't know, probably 200 or 300 joints between the two of us, back and forth. I think my thumbs were like blistered by the end of that, just from rolling, from how many joints we rolled and smoked, standing there, just me selling hats and him selling books and signing books. I got a signed copy of his book from that event as well. That's wow. one of my cherished items as well. So yeah, I mean, that to me was one of those stories, but I have hundreds of those stories. That's the real perk of the job was being able to travel around and go to all these festivals and meet the people who, shaped our culture and our world.
Wow. Well, I sure as hell hope that you're writing those stories down somewhere, and that one
that
day
could be book number 3, right?
Yeah, man, for sure. Sure. I mean,
one thing that the coronavirus has me doing is going through a lot of my archives and a lot of the stuff, you come home from a Cannabis Cup, you just sort of throw everything in a box and put it away. Now I'm opening up some of those things and seeing some real gems of, so I'm going to start posting on my Instagram some of these one-of-a-kind items that I've accumulated over the years.
Amazing. I can't wait to see that. I can only imagine what kind of amazing objects you've got over there. Danny, hold on. I'm just trying to take all that in. That was so cool.
I gotta say, for all the celebrities that I've met, and I've met a ton of them, and almost all of them have been, very interesting to me. It's the people I meet who were really from the underground that are most inspiring. The people who paid their dues that I meet, people who, I've met where, I've been standing with Jorge Cervantes and someone will walk up and say, "Hey man, thank you. You put my kids through college," to him, because their grow basically paid for them to send their kids to school. And it's really those moments that are special as well. Like meeting celebrities is fun and great and and exciting, but the most moving of moments is meeting people who've paid their dues and are now coming to realize that, like, hey, we're winning, and we got to keep fighting, but we're on the winning side, and that's important, I think.
Yeah, and I think that, thank you for sharing that. It illustrates something that I try to remind myself and others of all the time, which is, if you understand and respect the plant, it can be such a powerful tool for emotional, physical, and financial health. And, I think that story really illustrates that, where for a lot of people, this plant is their lifeblood in a variety of ways. And, I think that, if you treat the plant well and respect it and ultimately cultivate it and use it for all of the many good things that it's capable of, you will be rewarded, and you ought to be rewarded. So anyway.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I think, my original motivations were, you know, very selfish. I enjoyed the feeling that it gave me, and I enjoyed, you know, filling my pockets with the money that it gave me. And it wasn't until, you know, becoming more political about it, going to some rallies, going to Boston Freedom Rally, going to these events, and meeting people who had suffered due to the war on cannabis, that I realized that, like, there's more to this than just making yourself feel good and getting paid. There's, you have to give something back to this flower that's helping you and healing you, and it'll continue to give it back to you. That's why the original show was called Free Weed. You know, it was like, you know, a triple entendre, but it's basically, we want to free the weed, but I want weed to be free. I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm not one of these people who owns cannabis stocks that are, you know what I mean? Like, I think cannabis should be free. It should be like, you know, the tomatoes or cabbages or basil that you grow in your garden and you share with your neighbors and your friends, or you have a food co-op or a mom and pop, you know, farmer's market kind of situation. I you know, that's the way I envisioned it, like free weed or legal, you know, cannabis. So, you know,
Nice. Awesome. I'm all for it.
there's nothing wrong with making money. I mean, again, like, that's as long as your motivations are in the right place, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Absolutely. As long as you're doing it in an ethical way. And, you know, for me, it goes back to, if you're not exploiting the plant or the people that you're, you know, working with or selling to or whatever it may be, then make money. You deserve it. If you're doing something good for people, you deserve to make money. So
Right, it's a win-win. You know, like, I always consider, you know, cultivation in those terms, and you know, the underground marketplace in those terms as well. It's like, you know, typically it's a win-win.
Danny, I want to ask you, I want to go back to the fact that you've tried and, you know, have had access to just so much cannabis over your career and over your life, and that, you know, not everyone gets access to try the stuff that you've been able to try, and to judge the cups, and really to sample the best of the best. And so I'm curious if there's, you know, over the years, certainly there have been, I imagine, some standout moments where you just tried something and were like, whoa, like, this shit is different, or this is, you know, some next level, whatever. So I'm curious if there's anything that comes to mind for you as one of those, just like top of the top, best of the best.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost have to just divide it up by kind of decades, in a way, because I do remember the first, you know, bong hit of Kaimba that I did in the 80s, you know, which was, or maybe early 90s, which was, you know, just light years beyond, you know, the Mexi brick or the Arizona green or whatever else we were smoking at the time. And so I remember that distinctly. I remember in the 90s, later 90s, the first sort of white widow, white rhino, when that strain came around, it sort of obliterated the strains that came before it. It was like Nirvana, you know, did what Nirvana did to like hair bands. White Widow did to sort of Northern Lights and Skunk and some of the strains that were popular up until that. And then everything was white. White Widow, White Rhino, Great White Shark, everything was white. And then, you know, so early 2000s, I think, or maybe late 90s, would be the first experience with the Chem family, you know, and Sour Diesel and OG Kush, and that whole kind of gassiness that came around at that time, and just had a, you know, kind of obliterating effect on a lot of the other strains of that time. And then that became, you know, what people sort of considered the fire of its era. And I think, you know, even now there's like this kind of fruity, you know, the comeback of sort of gassy, fruity flavors, you know, gelato and do-si-dos and runts and things like that are the sort of new hype and new level of flavors. So there's kind of a moment like that for each, you know, each decade. But one thing that I have learned, you know, throughout all of it is that sort of the more you grow, the more that quality suffers. And yet another reason why growing your own, at home or in a grow tent or something is how you're going to come about the highest quality. And that if you're purchasing cannabis that's grown in, 100,000 square foot warehouse, it's not gonna come close quality wise.
Right. Well, I'm curious, what's in your head stash right now?
Well, what I'm smoking today, I actually have it here. It's Ghost Budsters Forbidden Fruit.
Ghost Budsters, that's hilarious.
This is Cannabis Cup winners from Michigan, actually. Ghost Budsters, and it's the Forbidden Fruit, but they've got a bunch of great flavors. I have extracts here as well, covert extracts. So, I'm doing some dabs and some joints, and it's interesting because the whole way we smoke is going to change because of this. I thought, one thing that I always loved was the circle of passing the joint around, and I think that's kind of, at least in the short term, probably in the long term, sort of a thing of the past, and that's too bad because the social aspects of that are something else. But maybe we do like the Jamaicans, and each person sort of rolls a joint for themselves, and we can still be in that circle, maybe 6 feet apart.
6 feet apart, yeah.
Right, but the community is still there, and the social part of it is still there, because I think not for nothing, but that's an important part of cannabis as well. I mean, I smoke at home by myself all the time, and it's great, and it's a wonderful feeling. But when it's a shared experience, I think there's an added bonus and benefit to it when it's shared. And sometimes you just look at your friend and giggle and laugh or whatever it might be. Those things that wouldn't have happened were you not in a social environment. And yet another medicinal benefit of cannabis, because if you're like a senior or a veteran who's sort of shut away or doesn't have a lot of social experiences, cannabis can be helpful in that way as well, and enhance that. And I think it's important. I think everybody's suffering right now. We're all going to come out of this with some stress and post-traumatic stress. Obviously it's happening, and cannabis is great for that.
I hear you. I completely agree with you. I actually even wrote an article last week about what I called post-pandemic stress disorder, because I'm pretty sure that all the isolation, all the anxiety, all the fear, the uncertainty, the loss of economic security, all the death, all this stuff is trauma. The whole world is going through a traumatic event right now. And I, like you, believe that cannabis could be a huge part of the healing that's going to be necessary for a lot of people. And I also, the optimist in me believes that this shared trauma might be able to unite people and bring us together and build community and get people to understand that so many of these barriers between us are artificial, and that really we all need each other and that we're all connected. So that's my hope. And we shall see. I think it's really interesting, though, that this smoking ritual, this sacred kind of cipher, might be disrupted for a while, or might not exist for a while. I hadn't really considered that, and that is pretty sad. It's pretty sad.
Yeah. I mean, it is. But I think that there's ways for us to compensate for that, and definitely cannabis plays a role. I think ethniogenic, psychotropic effects of hallucinogens as well. I mean, whether people are microdosing or taking heroic sized doses or whatever it might be, I do think that psilocybin mushrooms and LSD, MDMA, ayahuasca, all of these things can also play a role in that as well, because we one of the benefits that we've seen is an environmental benefit, and I think more people interested in farming and growing their own microgreens, growing their own vegetables and fruits, growing and and if that's something that we can take away from this, for all the misery and the pain and death and everything, that's a positive. And I think hopefully that will also help people to realize that these plants and these fungi have things to teach us. We shouldn't be so arrogant as the human species to think that we can't learn from the earth and the soil and the trees and the fungus that's out there, that's obviously has those effects for some type of purpose. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I could go on and on about it, but
well, I want to ask you about growing your own, because you just mentioned, the potential of people growing microgreens and growing their own food even. And, I'm a big believer that the world would just be so much better off if there were community gardens all over and everyone was eating locally grown, community grown, nutrient dense fruits and vegetables. And, not to mention cannabis even, but if you do some research about big ag and how much water and natural resources they're using and how much waste they're producing and how much harm they're doing on a global level, it's disgusting, frankly. And to me, it seems like we have the technology to make home growing and local growing so easy relative to 100 years ago or whatever. So anyway, I don't want to go too far off that tangent, but I do want to ask you, as far as for the listeners who might be interested in growing their own, aside from checking out your book and your podcast, what are some tips that you would offer, for someone who just wants to get started, or whether it's cannabis or anything, but let's focus on cannabis because,
Right. Well, the first tip is don't overspend. I mean, there's not that much that you really need to get started, especially because there's going to be a learning curve as well. So you can get yourself a kit, basically, that's like a grow tent, right? That just shows up in a box, but it includes, your lighting that you're going to need, whether it be LEDs or metal halide or high pressure sodium lights. Fluorescent lighting, is another option. All depending on your needs and the size of the tent and all of that. But these kits, you can get them for $500, less than $1,000 easily. And they come with everything you need, basically, in a box. It shows up, and one person can set this tent up. The light hangers are there, the exhaust fan is there, the charcoal filtration is there, and sometimes some of these kits might come with an expensive hydroponic system, or you don't need that either. Just get the tent and the light and the fans, and get yourself some cheap, 5-gallon buckets, like Home Depot buckets. Drill some holes in the bottom of the bucket. Get some Pro Mix, or some kind of soilless mix. Fill up the buckets and grow your plants in there. And monitor the temperature and the humidity with a simple thermometer and humidistat or whatever. And it's not that difficult. It's like having a fish tank or something. You got to monitor it. But you can do it, and you're going to learn things along the way, and you're going to make mistakes. And but you can also have microgreens in the same space, and you can have a plant that's a vegetable in there or whatever. It's fun. That's the ultimate thing at the end of the day, is that it's an enjoyable experience. It's actually quite fun of a hobby, and everything that went into your plants. The strain that it is, if it's specific for a medicinal purpose, or if you want to CBD only or whatever it might be, and whether there was pesticides used, because they've been under your supervision. If they've been overfed. Everything that went into these plants, and then when you harvest them, you dry them, you cure them, and you consume them. There's no better feeling, and you can do it, like I said, for cheap. Just don't overspend. Don't put minor before major. The important elements are light, air, plant food, water. Those are like the big ones. And, get like like you said, get yourself a book, check out some information on the internet, but don't believe everything you read on the internet, because there's a lot of bad info out there. So, you know, it's fun and it's a great hobby, and if it's, there's nothing like consuming cannabis that you created out of thin air. I call it modern day alchemy. It's like you took soil and the seeds and water and light and turned it into medicine for yourself. And there's no better feeling. So, uh, you know, that's why I'm an advocate for it. And it's going to be a better quality at a cheaper price than you can get at any dispensary, or even from your guy or gal that, comes by. Yeah. I mean, that's been my whole mission, is to get people to do that. And I think, another thing is we got to make it cool. People think gardening and farming is something that old people do or people in the country do, but anyone can garden, anyone can farm it. And you should be teaching your kids how to do it too. I mean, that's, this is the way, like you said, it takes the burden off of this like bloated industrial farming system that's just totally out of whack. And again, it has only been in existence for 50, 60 years. I mean, this is all post-World War II, where all these chemical nutrients and all this factory farming came in. I mean, before World War II, we relied on family farms, and we can do so again. We just need more of them out there. And, it's fun, it's cool, and it's enjoyable, and it's less expensive than buying stuff at the store for a higher quality product. So that's why I advocate for growing your own. And that's, like I said, get yourself a tent and the right equipment, and you can do it.
Amazing. And as soon as the quarantine hit New York, the first positive thought that came to mind for me was, this is the perfect time to start a home grow, because you're going to be home. You have the time to monitor it and to care for it. And, by the time this thing is over, you'll be able to harvest, you'll have something to enjoy,
To look forward to, something to look forward to. And, judging from, sales of my book and interest in the podcast, there is a growing interest in growing your own. And again, when, we mentioned World War II, the propaganda in America was grow a victory garden, grow your own, take the pressure off, because we're feeding all these soldiers overseas, and there's anything you grow here is going to go that much further to helping the cause. And, we're all in this together, is the cliche everyone, keeps seeing on TV or whatever, but that's ultimately the truth, is that, anything, I always thought of growing as a political act, because any cannabis you grow increases the amount of cannabis in the world. And thus, the thing in the 90s or early 2000s was overgrow the government, that was the computer, site that everyone went to, was overgrow.com. And the idea was, if enough people grow and if there's enough cannabis out there and the quality just keeps improving, then that helps the politics of this as well, because it's just like unstoppable. It's like trying to stop an avalanche, it's just you overgrow the government.
That's amazing. I never heard that before. That's beautiful. And again, I would invite the listeners to imagine if that were the approach that people took to food as well, how different our world would look. Instead of wasting, I don't know, I think it's like 20-30% of all food in the world gets wasted. And meanwhile, I think it's something like 1 in 8 people in the world are hungry. So it just doesn't add up, and
no. And even if you're selfish about it, the quality of the produce is better. I mean, think of the strawberries you get at the farmer's market versus the strawberries you get at the grocery store. I mean, it's like two completely different fruits. One is weighed down with water with no flavor, big, huge strawberries, but no flavor, and just, like just a thing that holds water, basically. And then the ones from the farmer's market are delicious. They might be a little small, a little smaller than the bloated, hydro berries, but they taste better and they're more nutritious, more delicious, and just a way better product to cook with or to eat.
Absolutely. And the best way to know your grower or know your farmer is to be your grower or be your farmer. And then once you grow that cannabis, you can consume it and get to know yourself in a whole new way. So
right, and all it takes is, like I said, a 3x3 or a 4x4 footprint. Like the size of a stand-up shower. In your house, you just got to keep it light, tight, and there you go. You can do it in the corner of your bedroom.
amazing. So Danny, any final thoughts or info that you'd like to share or shout outs or anything before we shift gears into the coaching portion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm on all basic social media. Facebook is Danny Danko, Twitter is Danny Danko, and Instagram is Danny Danko HT. The podcast is Grow Bud Yourself. You can check it out at growbudyourself.com or anywhere where you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, all the podcast places. And we have a Patreon page, which is really where like the community of the podcast lives. So if you want to sign up there, there's different levels and tiers that you can sign up, or you can just be a follower there for free, and then just get the notifications. But the paid, tipping thing starts at $4.20 a month. If you go to the $25 level, you get a free copy of my book, signed and shipped to you. So, and again, that's the community where if you want questions to ask, grow questions, or, we do giveaways. I've got like stuff that's there just for patrons on Patreon. Exclusive content as well. So, those are my shout outs. And yeah.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. And it makes me think, I need to go do that. I need to go make a Patreon and do that whole thing. And I want to ask you one more question before we shift gears, which is, you've had success and longevity in this space and have a pretty stellar reputation as far as I know. And so I'm wondering, what is your superpower? What has allowed you to succeed and grow, pun intended, of course, in the cannabis world?
I mean, I guess maybe patience. I try not to, overreact to anything in particular, sort of judge a situation from outside of it in some ways. And so I think that there's, we're obviously in an industry that it's gotten larger, of course, but when I started, it was quite, small, and in some ways a little bit incestuous, where there were business partners that had falling outs and all kinds of situations where you'd meet one person and they'd tell you about this person, and then you'd meet them and there'd be a whole different story, and there's all these disputes and marriages and partnerships, and it became kind of hard to navigate at times. And I think, sometimes you just have to step back and say, see the bigger picture and say, okay, there's all of these things going on, as there is in probably every industry, but in particular in this one, because, we all have to trust each other. We're actually still at war in a way. So, we have to trust each other. But I think being able to see the bigger picture and understand that, there's a larger vision, sometimes baby steps, as much as annoying as that can be, are important, because, if you put 5 or 6 baby steps together, you actually get a lot further than if you just demand something over and over and don't get there at all. So, there's a bit of compromise and a bit of just, hey, keep your eye on the prize, which is legal cannabis, which is, the prisoners released from prison, records expunged, home grow being legal, social use. When all this is over, we want to be treated like consumers of cannabis that we are, not criminals, not derelicts and dirtbags, and all these things, the stigma that we've had to live with. So I guess I would say, a little bit of patience is my superpower, or just being able to compromise and see the big picture.
So patience, and that reminds me of something I talk about in my book, the Cannabis Business Book, which Danny is one of the 50 experts I interview to give advice for cannabis entrepreneurs and investors. And one of the biggest things that came up repeatedly is take a long-term view. You cannot be in this industry for the quick flip or for a short, fast money type thing. It's just not going to work out for you. And if you really plan on being in this industry, you have to take the long-term view, because that war that we're still fighting to have weed be free is far from over, despite all the legalization and all the progress, which I'm not knocking it. It's great. I'm super happy that we've made so much progress as a community. But the plant is far from free. The stigma is far from over. There's still way too many prisoners who are, in a much more harmful situation and dangerous situation and an unjust situation just for being in the business of cannabis. And so there's really a lot of work left to do. And so if you're planning to be in the cannabis business, or if you want to make money off of cannabis, then you absolutely, one, must be an activist, and two, you must be patient and in it for the long haul if you want to succeed.
It's the same with growing. It parallels cultivation, because the biggest mistakes people make typically are overdoing it, overwatering, overfeeding. Sometimes you just have to step back and let the plants grow. Let them do their thing, and that's a hard lesson to learn for growing and in an industry. Is just sometimes let things happen organically.
Don't panic. It's organic. And speaking of things happening organically, I'm going to put on my coaching hat now, and I'm going to ask you, Danny, to share with me, if you're willing, some business or personal challenge that you're facing. And I'm going to give you my best shot at offering some support and taking you higher with some coaching.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of my biggest challenges really is procrastination. I think, I put things on my to-do list and then I sort of dread doing them in a way. I get this kind of resistance, almost like a fear of success. Like if this happens and this happens, then this is going to happen. And there's almost an anxiety there, even though it's what I want. So, I want my podcast to be successful, and I know the steps I need to take to make that happen. And it is happening. And yet I have this kind of weird innate resistance in ways to sometimes doing the thing I need to do in that moment. You know what I mean? Like I kind of put it off, or I sort of dread it for a while. And then when I do it, it goes great. Let's say, like if I have an interview I have to do or whatever, I sort of dwell and dwell and dwell. And then I do it and it goes great and I get it over with and I feel great about it. And but it's that anticipation of it sometimes that causes almost like a block in me in a way. And I don't quite understand where it comes from, or maybe it's just part of my process and it's necessary. I don't know. But I do feel like in ways it keeps me from thriving 100%. Mm-hmm. Or like a text that I get, from someone where I know what I want to say and I know, and I just wait to reply for whatever reason. I just, right now is not the right time for me to reply to this, even though I have a reply or whatever. I don't know. It's just this strange resistance sometimes to forward progress.
Very interesting. I can totally relate. I'm a big procrastinator, and that is something that I have to work on constantly. I could do it later. It'll be fine. No big deal. And I can tell you in my studies of, psychology, coaching, high performance, etc., procrastination is categorized as a form of self-sabotage. And I think it's an important piece of awareness just to recognize it as such, and to see it as a harmful behavior, and one that's easily changeable, or maybe not easily, but it certainly is changeable. And then I do want to make a joke, which is, maybe you should smoke less weed. Just kidding.
Well, it's like weed or no weed, it's there. And I think, some of it, I think, has to do with the 18 years I spent at High Times with this monthly deadline, where, exactly what day everything you have is due. And there's a managing editor that's expecting that editorial to be in their hands on that day. And, there's times when I would wait literally till the last day and just bang it all out in 3 or 4 hours. And, and I knew I probably could have done a better job if I had taken my time, but it's almost like I needed the pressure and I needed the deadline to be right around the corner in order to act. And like you said, it is self-sabotage, because ultimately, you could do a better job if you had more time, and you did have the time. You just wasted the time, and I don't know.
So
I don't know what the solution is, but I started microdosing in order to try to sort of break through this as well, because if it is self-sabotage, then that means, you have some type of block, that doesn't want you to succeed. And I just think that's crazy. I have succeeded. I continue to succeed. But, but sometimes I stand in my own way.
Right. And it's really interesting for me to hear all that, because I can totally relate to all of that, especially the pressure. For me, I like having that pressure, because then for me, I'm going to finish the thought. Sorry, something just came up. I'll get to it. But for me, it's like there's a certain extra joy or thrill of being in that pressure situation of oh shit, it's all due tomorrow. Let me see if I could pull it all together and get it done. And there's a certain joy I get from, feeling clutch, or feeling like, oh yeah, I got this shit done, like I could wait till the last minute and it's still cool, kind of thing. Does that resonate for you at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like, you're laying the tracks down as the train is, barreling towards you, and, you keep laying the tracks and you get kind of addicted to the thrill of coming back close,
Right. And then the thing that came up for me that made me laugh is, we're both Soviet, and I feel like there's this cultural Soviet thing that, and I know for me, I've definitely been raised with this belief from my parents and grandparents, who are super Soviet, right? Because they grew up there, that like, you have to suffer. Things have to be hard.
Right.
Like if things come easy, if success comes easy, then you're like a bad human being or something, because we must suffer. Like I feel like, I don't know if that resonates for you at all, but I feel like that's such a big cultural thing.
Yeah. Oh no, 100%. I mean, I literally had that conversation with my mom, that, how, she'll tell me how bad it was, and yet, how much great, amazing art and poetry came out of the suffering, and that those are the things that you don't get when you don't suffer. You don't get great art and great poetry and great all those great things, because that has to come out of suffering. And that's I mean, there is some truth to it, I think, because look at, the comedians, typically, have these backgrounds where they, they needed that approval, or they needed to suffer in order to be funny. There's this myth that exists. And I think, yeah, you're right. It is a Soviet kind of thing. It's almost like you relish, the suffering because that good things come out of that.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know how do you get past it though?
So I want to ask you, I want to get a bit deeper in this because I heard you offered two potential options, which is one that, hey, maybe procrastinating is just part of my process and that's okay. And I'll just keep doing it and that's fine. I heard that as one option. Another option I heard you say was, I feel like I could do things better and thrive 100% if I didn't procrastinate. So that's a second option. And the third option is, there's plenty more options, but those are just two that you mentioned. So I'm wondering if if either of those sound like the one that you want, or if maybe there's a third option or something that comes to mind for you. Like, what do you think would be a good way forward for you?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's been working for me, like the procrastination and it's worked. And so, part of me says, why mess with something that works? Because, again, maybe I need that pressure. Maybe I need to, you know, I, you know, in order to thrive, in order to, I have to suffer to get the good art out. But again, like, I don't know, maybe there's a happy medium where I could do that without quite reaching the level of sort of stress that sometimes comes out of that, where I have this dread of doing the thing, and yet I do the thing and I feel fine afterwards. So it all happens in the moments of anticipation, and rather than even while I'm doing it, I'm not really stressing about it. And then after I'm done, I'm like, why was I even kind of resisting that? Like that was so easy, and I don't know, maybe I honestly feel like a lot of people feel the same way about a lot of things. Because I have heard people discuss this kind of thing, and I don't think it's unique to me in any way. But it is that weird sort of existential dread of like, what if this all goes wrong? Or I don't know. There's just this weird feeling of like, before it happens, that there's infinite possibilities, and some of them are negative, and I don't
So
know.
yeah, so let me ask you this, Danny. What's this procrastination costing you?
Um, that's a good question. I guess just a little bit of my, I don't know, just well-being, I guess. Like, because once in a while, I guess there'll be like a sleepless night, where I'll just have I'll feel insomnia for no particular reason. Just your brain's racing, thinking about the things you got to do the next day. And especially now, it's like most of it's pretty stress free, as far as, I have a podcast a week, and I have, I got to plan, guests and content and things like that, but it's really not as sort of fast paced as it was when I had a print magazine and a website and, all these other things. It's basically just social media and a podcast. And yet still I'll find reasons to sort of, not sleep on it and be thinking about it in the middle of the night. And I don't know. So I guess that's really what it costs. It doesn't really cost me anything, I don't think, financially or in any real major way. I think it's just a little bit of extra stress.
Got it. And so I'm wondering then, how important is it for you to change this behavior or to solve this procrastination issue?
Wow. It's really not at the moment. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that
I'll do it
important.
later. I'll do it later. I don't need to
I'll
solve
do
it
later.
now.
And also, I mean, I may be taking on more responsibilities in the near future, and it might become a bigger issue. But again, I think I just need a more, I just need a probably like a better to-do list, basically, and and a better feeling of scratching things off of that list, because it does feel good to take the things off that list. It's just the moments right before that that are the tricky ones. You know what I mean? Where you're just like, maybe I could do this tomorrow.
So, oh yeah, I could definitely do this tomorrow, or maybe even the day after. It'll still be fine. Who cares?
That's what's nice about actually having a weekly show, because we have to put out a show every Thursday. In the past, we just did it on the side, so we do a show every 3 weeks, a show every 2 weeks, maybe take a month. From 2011 to 2018, there was only 103 episodes, so there were few and far between sometimes. And now that I'm doing them, I'm committed to a weekly show in order to maintain consistency, because it was really the one thing that held back the show in the past was being consistent. And so it has given me a better routine, as far as that goes, because I know, you can't leave everything to Wednesday night. If you're going to launch Thursday, you got to do part of it on Monday, part of it Tuesday, get it all stitched together. There is a schedule. So that's nice. It's nice to have that.
What about that is nice? What does that give you?
Just a bit of a structure of and then I feel good at the end of, Monday, if I have part of it already in the can, then I know that I'm not going to be stressing Wednesday, because I also have Tuesday to do some of it, and then Wednesday to do some, and then it's like a little bit less stress in terms of scheduling and all that.
So let me ask you this, Danny. In growing cannabis, how important is a schedule and consistency?
Very, very important. I mean, I teach people all the time, you have to see your plants at least once a day. I mean, regardless of whether everything's going perfectly well, and you don't have to water, you don't have to, even if the temperature and everything's perfectly fine, the humidity, you still have to get in there, look at the undersides of the leaves, just, you have to maintain a schedule, and part of that means seeing those plants every day, and not just the plant that's like right at the front of the tent, but like the one in the back corner as well, because inevitably that's where the problems are going to arise anyways, is the furthest one away from you. So yeah, it is important. I tell people, keep notes, have a calendar handy, and know exactly what you did on every day. And if everything goes well, you want to replicate that. And if there's a problem, you have a record of it. You can go back and see what you messed up. But it is important.
In growing or in cultivation, if you procrastinate in those situations?
Yeah. I mean, I have, for sure. Especially if you're growing, hydroponically, and everything sort of revolves around your reservoir. Your reservoir is where all your water and your nutrients and everything is in there, and you're really supposed to change that every week. And you can stretch it to like every 2 weeks. And I can remember stretching it to like, oh, I'll just add some plain water, and I'll just add some, it's such a pain in the ass. And, the plants ultimately are going to suffer if you do that. But, you learn that the hard way by stretching it too far and saying, oh, maybe I can just go a month without, emptying this thing out and starting over, just by adding, plain water and nutrients. And what happens is it doesn't work that way. You end up with a toxic mix, and you end up hurting the plants. But I do remember distinctly just being like, it's a pain in the ass. I don't think I want to do that right now. It can always wait a day. And then the next day it can always wait another day.
Right.
Then a week builds up to, a week and a half, and you're like, man, they seem to be okay.
Right.
They're still green.
But so
yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of laziness. It's a little bit of, putting things off, and,
Right. And so I hear that you've done this in your cultivation, and you do it more so, it sounds like, in your creative work. I'm curious, what's the belief about yourself that allows you to procrastinate, or to say, oh, I could do it later. I could do it. I'll be fine. It's fine. I could wait till the last minute.
I don't know. I mean, I think it goes back to sort of maybe the self-sabotage idea of like, maybe you don't deserve all of this. Maybe you're an imposter. Maybe this is like, you know, rarefied air, and what are you doing breathing in it? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I haven't never really analyzed it this deeply, but I do know that like I feel like a lot of people have that sort of hang up, and I can't say that I go 100% of the time without that.
So I've heard you say fear of success, and I've heard you say fear of failure. and I would offer to you that likely it's both, and maybe even a fear of loss, or a fear of abandonment, or fear of the unknown. At different times, there's different triggers for the resistance. And
Fear of change.
Fear of change. Yeah.
Change. Yeah.
Because what might happen if things change? What might happen to you?
I don't know. I like the way things are. I don't know. The way things are, I'm comfortable with.
Right.
If things change, that I might be uncomfortable there.
Right.
And I'm not a believer in that the whole Oprah, go out of your comfort zone. And I like to be comfortable.
What is that technique called where you stress the plants and kind of like shake them and break them a little so they grow bigger? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different there's fimming, and there's just sort of beating up on the plants, and yeah, there's different sort of techniques like that where you stress them out for different reasons, particularly if you want them to hermaphrodite and you want to create feminized seeds and things like that. That's another stress factor, that you stress the plants out in order to make them behave in a particular way.
But what's interesting is, I don't know. My high level basic understanding is that helps them grow ultimately.
Well, yeah, if you beat up the plants, it does make them stronger. I mean, like I had a friend, Easy Gene, who would use a hockey stick and he would just rub the top of the plants, and you'd think he was killing them. I mean, they'd all be bent over, and then within 20 minutes, you see they come back, and they come back stronger and thicker stems, and they're able to carry the weight of the buds later. Like he never used stakes or any kind of trellising or anything. He just beat his plants up so much that they're just developed stronger trunks and stronger branches.
Interesting. So what I want to point out one thing to you, because I think this is a great contradiction. You're telling me on one hand, it's like, I like things the way they are. I don't want to change. I don't want to go do this thing that might change stuff because that'll be stressful or uncomfortable. Right.
Right.
But then at the same time, by not doing the thing and procrastinating on it, you stress yourself out.
Right. And then after the thing is done, I feel great.
Right. But there's this situation, the in-between situation is, you're like trying to avoid stress, and then you create this stress. You get that?
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's this dynamic of that you're putting yourself in, that's like kind of a lose-lose in some way. And the point that I want to make is that there's a different way. That, if you're willing to try something different, there is a different path. Do you see that? Do you hear that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm open to different paths.
So I don't have an answer for you, right? And this is a big, deep topic. We only scratched the surface because there's a lot of stuff here. Like looking at all, it would help if we looked at like a specific situation where you procrastinated, and like, what did you choose to do instead? And, kind of, we could break it down and extract some wisdom out of that. But where we are going to come up on time soon. And so I want to offer you a couple of ideas and maybe some suggestions. First, is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So first is there's a great book that I absolutely love all about resistance. And maybe you know it already. It's called The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield. And it's literally all about resistance, and that story that we tell ourselves, instead of doing the thing of, oh, I could do it tomorrow or whatever it may be. So I would definitely recommend that book just to bring greater awareness of what's happening to me in those moments, and actually seeing how well documented and common that is as part of the creative process. It's guaranteed. That procrastinating part of you is never going to go away, right? And I think it's really important for you to remind yourself that, hey, in spite of that, I've still created all of this great stuff and have achieved all of these accomplishments and successes and wins. And so even if I have that procrastinating voice or that resistance, or even if it's the fear or whatever, that's just hardwired in, and that's okay. It's not that big a deal, only if you allow it to become a big deal, right? And then once the reservoir goes toxic, then it's a big deal. But if it's just like a small thing, you know, as long as you have it under control, it's not a major issue, right? So I think maybe you'll find some comfort in just acknowledging that. And then my recommendation for you would be to just, when you start recognizing that voice, and you notice it and it's happening when it starts, pull that weed, nip it in the bud. Those are my terrible plant puns. But I think there's, like, I would almost challenge you to make it a game for yourself of how quickly can I move out of that space, or how quickly can I move past that, and remind yourself that, hey, this is just my fear of failure talking, or this is my fear of change, or this is my, you know, some stupid belief that I picked up somewhere that actually is not what I want right now. And instead remind yourself, because it's really about the habit of, what do you do when this happens? Do you indulge in procrastinating, or do you decide to take an action, or take one of those patient baby steps away from the resistance and towards the goal and the task? And so what I believe is, if you get more attuned to recognizing and and noticing, oh, hey, this is my fear of whatever just trying to get me to push this off, and saying to yourself instead, no, fuck that, I'm going to go do this thing. I like crossing it off the list, or I like getting my stuff done. And I'm going to be happy when I review at the end of the day or the week and say, hey, on this day I wanted to procrastinate, and instead I did this. This is just a hockey stick coming in to ruffle the leaves over here, or to push around my branches, but that, I'm just going to grow because of this. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
All
yeah, for
right.
sure.
Do you think that's helpful? Do you think that's,
Yeah,
something that you could put into play?
yeah. I mean, I'll try for sure.
All
Definitely.
right. I would recommend, I recommend the book. It's super entertaining. It's short. And I think I would recommend it to anyone who's a creative of any kind, because the resistance is real. And I imagine for a heady guy like yourself, that resistance is probably really clever and smart, and it's like, nah, come on, man, just, like, a very resourceful resistance. Does that sound
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right, well, I hope that that's helpful, and I'm going to ask you, what was the most valuable part of that conversation with me, or what was your biggest insight from that?
I think, just maybe making it a game. I'm pretty competitive when it comes to things like ping pong and pinball and whatever else it might be, golf, soccer, whatever. Like I'm competitive, and I think if I feel like it's a game that I can win, like chess, that's another one us Soviets love. I've been teaching my son, and it's interesting because you get into like the chess as a metaphor for everything. It's wild. But anyways, he hasn't beat me once. He just turned 10, but he hasn't beat me once, and it's because I'm competitive. I'm not going to let him beat me. He's going to have to earn it, and he knows that. He doesn't like it, but it's true. So when he does finally win, it'll be for real. But it's the same with this. I think making it a game and thinking of it as an opponent and winning over that opponent will feel like a triumph for me and a win. And I think that to me is the takeaway and a way of seeing it that I didn't look at it before. It was always a nemesis rather than a competitor or an enemy. It was like it had the power. But I think, if I feel like I can take that power and use it against it, then that's a win. And I can feel that same relief and euphoria that I feel at the end of completing the task, even before I actually start doing it, just from defeating the resistance to doing it.
Right. That's awesome. I would offer you just a little cherry on top of that, just some food for thought is, I'm hearing you say that you could tap into your competitiveness and get that euphoria of the win at the start of the task as well as at the end of the task by seeing the victory over resistance as a win and enjoying and celebrating that win. And I would just offer you that two things that might help. One is viewing those moments of resistance of not only may you be letting your resistance win, but you might be letting your competitors win by procrastinating, right? Because if you're choosing, maybe it would be helpful for you to tell yourself the story like, hey, if I'm procrastinating right now, but my competition or whatever isn't, then I'm selling myself short. And maybe that fear, ironically, will spark you towards the productive action. That's one idea. I don't know if that works for you or not, and I'm just throwing it out there as a possible one. And then the other thing I just want to remind you of is ultimately you have the power because the resistance also comes from you, right? That's a part of you.
Right.
And so I want to caution you from, don't go to war with yourself, right? Like compete with that voice or that belief or that tendency. And also at the same time, know that, hey, it's okay. This is a part of me and that's okay. And sometimes I want to be lazy. Sometimes I'm afraid, or sometimes I want to procrastinate, and that's fine. Because I know for me, I'm just throwing that in for you because I know for me, sometimes when I get into procrastinating, it's easy for the reservoir to become toxic. And when I say the reservoir, I'm talking about my mind. And I get into that place of like just abusing myself in my head of saying, oh, you lazy piece of shit. What the fuck are you doing? Go to work. What the fuck is wrong with you? And all that stuff that I don't know if that's a thing for you, but I know that I've certainly fallen into that trap before. And I know how painful it is. And so, the way to not let that happen is to accept that, hey, sometimes I'm going to be lazy. That's okay. So.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Nice.
I think
I need what you're smoking.
You have to give yourself that time too. I mean, you have to, I think really, if there was a way to keep score, that would be helpful. If I could say like, I won this time, That's 1-0 me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to start marking it down.
That's a great. Are you committing to that? Because
I
I'll
think so.
check in
Yeah.
and
Is
I'll.
that, I was just thinking about like the competitiveness of it, and I was like, well, how do I actually, keep score? Just, you know, 1-0, Danny
Yeah. Well,
versus Danny.
I would. Well, so are you willing to commit to keeping score for a week?
I mean, I'll try. Really, what I want to do is just, do it, and like, we'll see.
I'll try. That's the.
It's the same with chess. It's like, you win some, you lose some, but you learn something every time. But, I don't have a running, score in my head when that, as far as that goes. But
Yeah. No, I hear you.
maybe
And
I will, maybe I'll think about that. And
I would highly encourage you to keep score for a week or even a day. Just like pick one work day and map out the to-do list at the beginning, and then for each thing, see if each time you don't procrastinate, mark it down, and each time you do, mark it down. And I would almost think of it like a batting average, right? Because even if you get one extra base hit, the difference between a 250 and a 300 over the stretch of a 10-year career is a huge difference. So even just one win over resistance every 10 at bats compounds to be a huge difference.
right.
So I don't know. I'm just gonna put it out there. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Danko.
I like it.
Well, Danny, thank you so very much for joining me on the show today and for allowing me to do my coaching dance with you. It was a lot of fun for me to have you here, and I hope you had a good time and hopefully got something out of this. I wanted to know if you have any closing words, thoughts, anything else before I let you go and get on with your day where you're going to kick resistance's ass.
Yeah, I mean, just closing words would be to people, just like you said, respect the plant, and it will, do wonders for you in return. And it was an honor to be a part of your events here in the city. Hopefully that'll be coming back sometime in the future as well. And thank you for having me on the show. Thank you to the people out there, keep the fight going. We still got a ways to go. We got a lot to celebrate, and we got the wind at our backs. So it's no time to slow down. New York legalization is coming, and we need it. And nationwide legalization and worldwide is on the way as well. So keep the fight going. Enjoy the healing flower, and thank you for your patronage and support and kind words and friendships throughout all of the years. I have to thank Cannabis for everything that she's done for me, and for really making my life much more enjoyable and giving me experiences that I couldn't have paid for. So thank you.
Nice. Yes, thank you, Cannabis. You're number one.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is the Cannabis Business Coach. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is
the Cannabis Business Coach.